On the morning of June 14, 2026, news began spreading across the Spanish-speaking internet that something had gone terribly wrong in Rio de Janeiro. 2 helicopters had collided in mid-air. Within hours, reports began naming the victims. Among them was a 23-year-old Argentine YouTuber, known to millions simply as Gaspi. For years, Gaspy had built his reputation by making strangers uncomfortable. He walked through the streets with a microphone wrapped in electrical tape, asked questions that nobody expected, and somehow turned awkwardness into one of the most successful internet careers in Argentina. To some people, he was hilarious. To others, he represented everything wrong with modern internet culture. His videos were repeatedly removed. His humor constantly sparked arguments. His public persona seemed deliberately designed to irritate, provoke, and to generally confuse people. Yet, when news of his death emerged, something unusual happened. Many of the tributes were not talking about the chaotic character viewers knew from YouTube. Instead, they were talking about a thoughtful young man who had spent years struggling beneath the weight of the character he had created. Because behind the loud voice, the bizarre interviews, and the controversy, there was another story unfolding. A story about internet fame, public pressure, reinvention, and a creator who seemed to be entering a completely new chapter of his life. A chapter that had barely begun before it was suddenly ended. Long before millions of people recognized the name Gaspi, there was simply Gaspar Prim Díaz. He was born in Argentina on December 28, 2002. Although most people would later associate him entirely with Argentina, part of his childhood was spent in neighboring Chile. He held dual Argentine-Chilean citizenship and lived for several years in La Serena, where he developed strong connections to the country and maintained family ties there throughout his life. During his younger years, football appeared to be a serious focus. He played in youth systems connected to both Universidad de Chile and Deporte La Serena. Looking back years later, he would joke about his football career and admit that he was never quite as talented as he once hoped. But the experience exposed him to competition, public expectations, and the pressure that comes from trying to succeed in front of others. At the same time, another interest was beginning to develop: the internet. Unlike many future influencers who dreamed of becoming famous online, all the way from childhood, Gaspar appeared fascinated by performance itself. Various accounts suggest he was naturally more reserved than the character audiences would later come to know. As a teenager, he became interested in unusual forms of comedy that deliberately challenged social norms and created discomfort. That distinction would become important. Because Gaspi was never simply a man with a camera. Gaspi was a character, a carefully constructed version of himself that exaggerated awkwardness, confidence, recklessness, and absurdity into something larger than life. The deeper viewers looked into his later interviews, the more it became apparent that the person and the persona were not always the same thing. What started as an experiment would eventually consume almost every part of his public identity, and it would change his life completely. Although Gaspi created his YouTube channel years earlier, his real rise began through short-form content posted online during the early 2020s. His formula sounded simple: walk into public spaces, approach strangers, ask questions that nobody else would ask, then leave the audience wondering whether they should laugh, cringe, or feel uncomfortable. Gaspi quickly developed a visual identity that became instantly recognizable. He carried a black microphone wrapped in electrical tape. He spoke with a distinctive, raspy voice. Nearly every interaction began with his trademark greeting. For many viewers, hearing that greeting was enough to know exactly what was coming next. His videos operated differently from traditional prank channels. Rather than focusing on elaborate setups, Gaspi relied on unpredictability. He would approach complete strangers and steer conversations into bizarre territory through a combination of confidence, awkward silences, absurd humor, and deliberately uncomfortable questions. The reactions were genuine, and that authenticity became addictive. Viewers never knew whether the next interaction would end in laughter, confusion, anger, or complete disbelief. The internet responded immediately. One breakout video reportedly surpassed 13 million views. Others generated millions more. Despite maintaining only a surprisingly small number of publicly available uploads, his audience exploded. Over time, he accumulated more than 2.5 million subscribers on YouTube alone, with millions more followers spread across Instagram and other platforms. That growth created a strange mystery around him. Most major creators build enormous libraries of content. Gaspy did not. In fact, many viewers discovered him through clips, re-uploads, and discussions, rather than through a huge catalogue of videos. This scarcity only increased curiosity. Every upload felt like an event. And the more difficult his content became to find, the more people wanted to watch it. By the time his popularity reached its peak, Gaspy had become one of the most recognizable young internet personalities in Argentina. But the same qualities driving his success were also creating the problems that would soon follow. As Gaspy's audience grew, so did the criticism. The very thing that made his content successful was also the thing that repeatedly placed it at risk. For critics, it often looked like he was deliberately pushing social boundaries, victimizing unsuspecting people, simply to generate reactions. The result was a cycle that followed him throughout much of his career. A new video would appear, people would begin sharing clips, arguments would break out online. Then in some cases, the video would simply disappear. Several of his uploads were removed by platforms for violating content policies. Some contained material that platforms considered inappropriate. Others simply crossed lines that moderation systems were unwilling to tolerate. Gaspy became so accustomed to this process that he reportedly joked about it with his audience, telling followers they needed to watch videos quickly because there was always a chance they would be taken down. Ironically, every removal seemed to make him more famous. The internet has always been attracted to forbidden content. Whenever a video disappeared, curiosity increased. People wanted to know what had been removed and why. Clips spread across social media. Discussions intensified. The controversy itself became part of the entertainment. This created an unusual situation. Gaspy was becoming one of Argentina's most recognizable creators, while simultaneously having portions of his work repeatedly erased from the platforms that had made him famous. The divide between supporters and critics continued to grow. Fans saw someone who was fearless, original, and impossible to predict. They admired the fact that he appeared willing to say things that other creators would never risk saying. Many believed that the awkwardness was the joke itself. The discomfort was intentional. That was the entire point. Others saw something very different. They argued that his humor sometimes crossed lines unnecessarily. Some believed he was using embarrassment as entertainment. Others felt certain interactions went too far. Few creators occupied such a strange position. Millions of people knew who Gaspy was. Yet what people couldn't agree on was whether they actually liked him or not. What nobody could deny was that the strategy worked. His audience continued growing. His name became increasingly recognized throughout Latin America. And from the outside, it appeared that everything was going exactly according to plan. But behind the scenes, a different reality was beginning to emerge. One of the most revealing aspects of Gaspy's story is that his biggest challenge was not criticism. Instead, it was success itself. For years, viewers only saw the character, they saw the confidence, they saw the strange humor, they saw somebody who appeared completely comfortable making a spectacle of himself in public. What they did not see was the pressure required to maintain that image every day. As his audience expanded into the millions, Gaspy increasingly found himself trapped inside a version of himself that had originally been created as an experiment. The louder the character became, the harder it became to separate public expectations from private reality. Years later, he would speak openly about the consequences. He described periods of demotivation, sadness, and emotional exhaustion. He spoke about the effects of constant exposure and the strange experience of presenting a version of yourself to millions of people, while privately struggling with issues that those same people could not see. One of his most revealing reflections concerned the nature of online fame itself. When he first started creating content, it felt like a game. But then as the audience grew, the fun aspects seemed to fade away almost entirely. It became work, then responsibility, then pressure. According to his own comments, there were periods when he wanted to walk away completely. Maintaining a character for years while simultaneously growing up in public became increasingly difficult. The jokes that had once entertained him no longer had the same effect. His interests, his priorities, and who he was as a person were changing. Eventually, the pressure became impossible to ignore. Following the period around Argentina's World Cup celebrations, Gaspi largely disappeared from social media. What followed was an absence that lasted roughly 2 years. His accounts remained mostly inactive. New content stopped appearing. Fans were left wondering what had happened. For many creators, disappearing for that long can permanently destroy momentum. The internet moves quickly. Audiences move on. Algorithms forget. Yet Gaspi appeared willing to accept that risk. The hiatus was not presented as a marketing strategy or a planned rebrand. Instead, it increasingly appeared to be a response to personal struggles, mental health challenges, and the growing burden of living as a character that millions of people expected him to remain forever. A character that many people openly hated. From the outside, it looked like the rise of Gaspi had stalled. But in reality, the next chapter of his story was already beginning, and it would reveal a different side of him that much of his audience had never seen before. When Gaspi finally returned in 2024, many viewers expected more of the same. Instead, they saw something very different. The comeback arrived in the form of a documentary-style video titled La Vuelta de Gaspi. For perhaps the first time in his career, the focus was not on making strangers uncomfortable. It was not built around shock value, controversy, or awkward humor. The video was centered on him, his experiences, his struggles, his perspective on what the previous few years had actually been like. The response was enormous. The video attracted millions of views within days and revealed a side of Gaspi that much of his audience had never encountered before. Viewers who had spent years watching the loud, unpredictable character were suddenly hearing from the person underneath. Perhaps the most significant part of the comeback was not the video's success. It was the direction it suggested. Gaspi no longer seemed interested in being known exclusively as the character that had consumed him. His newer projects increasingly incorporated documentary storytelling, long-form videos, interviews, commentary, and more personal reflections. The content was evolving alongside him. He also began appearing on larger platforms, where conversations could go beyond quick jokes and viral clips. Interviews revealed someone who was becoming increasingly reflective about fame, creativity, and the internet culture that had helped make him successful. For the first time in years, it seemed that Gaspi was building something sustainable. Not simply another viral video, but instead a second act. And that act was only just beginning. The clearest evidence of that reinvention arrived in 2025. Gaspi accepted an invitation to participate in an enormous creator boxing event organized by Ibi Llanos. It was basically Creator Clash, but for a different audience and location. It was one of the biggest internet events in the Spanish-speaking world and would place him in front of millions of viewers who may have never even watched one of his videos. Preparing for the event required a level of discipline that many people did not associate with him. He trained extensively. He documented the process. He reportedly lost around 26 kilograms during preparation and transformed his physical condition. The fight itself did not go as planned. His opponent stopped him in the opening round. But what people remembered was not necessarily the defeat, but it was the reaction that came afterwards. Gaspi became emotional. He acknowledged the effort that had gone into the preparation and the support he had received from his team. Rather than mocking the moment, Many viewers responded with admiration. It revealed a level of vulnerability that contrasted sharply with the chaotic character who had originally become famous through street interviews. In May 2026, he launched a new project, a series that again pushed his content in a different direction. The project suggested that he was continuing to experiment, continuing to grow, and continuing to search for what came after the original Gaspy formula. For perhaps the first time since becoming famous, his future appeared unusually open, and then everything changed. In June 2026, Gaspy traveled to Brazil alongside Argentine director Lucas Vinhale. The trip was connected to activities surrounding Oliver Tree's world tour. On the morning of June 14th, 2 helicopters collided over Recreio dos Bandeirantes in Rio de Janeiro. Gaspy was aboard one of the aircraft. Also on board were Oliver Tree, Lucas Vinhale, Lucas Brito Chaves, and the helicopter pilot Alexandre Souza. The second helicopter was being flown by Charles Marciac. All 6 people involved lost their lives. One of the aircraft came down near an electric vehicle dealership, where a major fire followed. Authorities launched an investigation, and the exact cause of the collision at the time of making this video is still unknown. The creator, who had spent years building a second chapter for himself, was gone at just 23 years old. Gaspy's story is unusual because it is really 2 stories unfolding at the same time. The first is the story most people know, a provocative internet character who built millions of followers through pushing boundaries and taking risks in the content that he created and shared. The second is the story that emerged later, a young man struggling with the pressure of fame, questioning the monster that he had created, stepping away from the internet, and gradually trying to build something more personal and meaningful. By 2026, that process appeared to be working. His content was evolving, new projects were launching, opportunities were expanding beyond the format that had originally made him famous. That is perhaps what makes all of this feel so strange. It's not that a famous creator's story ended unexpectedly, but that it ended at the exact moment it felt like a completely new life was about to begin. Thank you so much for watching. I'm uploading daily true crime and dark content here on this channel, so make sure that you're subscribed, hit like on the video, and also drop a comment so you get shown more of my stuff. Please do be careful out there, and I'll see you tomorrow.